Well, good afternoon. We are in our fourth week, and tonight we're going to, late this afternoon, we're going to discuss chapters 10, 11, and 12. Chapter 10, Motivating Employees. And then that goes right with the next one. They're very complementary. Chapter 11, Human Resource Management, Finding and Retaining the Best Employees. And then finally, Chapter 12, dealing with union and employee management issues. So let's begin with Chapter 10, Motivating Employees. Learning goals for this chapter. Explain Taylor's theory of scientific management. Our old friend Fred Taylor. Describe the Hawthorne studies and their significance to management. Identify the levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and apply them to employee motivation. Distinguish between the motivators and hygiene factors identified by Frederick Hertzberg. Explain, I think I might have missed one here. Let me go back. Yes, looks like I did. Differentiate among theory X, theory Y, and theory Z. And then, as you can see, we have a lot of outcomes we want to discuss. Explain the key principles of goal setting, expectancy, reinforcement, and equity theories. Show how managers put motivation theories into action through such strategies as job enrichment, open communication, and job recognition. And then finally, show how managers personalize motivation strategies to appeal to employees across the globe and across generations. That is a little difficult, and I hope that we can do that, although we may fall a little short, or probably not give the pardon me, as full explanation as you would like to see and or hear. There are basically two types of rewards: intrinsic rewards, which obviously with the word, the first two letters, in meaning internal, are referring to self in a way. And this really talks about things like pride in what you do and the fact that you have done something, taken it from start to end. It's gone very well, and you have a sense of accomplishment. And you're not asking anybody else to say anything to you about that. Something that you can see yourself, and you take great pride in that. On the other hand, we have extrinsic rewards, which are things given to you by someone else. Notice here a promotion, a pay raise, some type of award, some type of recognition, maybe even just a pat on the back saying job well done, but it's done from someone else, and he or she is recognizing what you have done and thanking you for it and asking you to continue, although that may not be an overt statement. Continue doing what you've been doing because you've done it well. But again, that comes from outside. Fringe benefits fall into things known as extrinsic rewards, and here we have things of flexible work hours and vacation more than the traditional 2 weeks, promotions, things of that nature, match a 401k, and things of that nature. Now, the first motivation theory we want to talk about is Fred Taylor's scientific management. Fred Taylor was the originator of studying management, if you will. You can see Fred Taylor mentioned here on page 271 in your text. And what Taylor really was after was making sure that people work efficiently and effectively and doing things that they were supposed to do. And he talked about getting the right person to do the right job. He talked about having the right tools and things of that nature. He also was a time management person, and he looked 3 things that he was concerned about, as the slide says, the time it took somebody to do something, the methods of work, in other words, how you do the work, and then rules of work. Taylor wanted those codified. He wanted those set down so people followed rules and they weren't freelancers. In other words, do what they wanted to do, how they wanted to do it, and when they wanted to do it. Taylor wanted them to work when he wanted them to work, and rest when he wanted them to rest, and not do something in between. So notice what he talked about. He said to managers, you need to know how the job is performed. So you need to gather information about time and motion, perhaps do some comparing and contrasting to find the best way to do things. Once you've found the right way to do things, write them down and put them in rules and policies and procedures so that people follow. Notice he talked about choosing people with the right skills. There are two ways to hire. You hire for a skills matches job vacancy. In other words, you're hiring a person that he or she has the skills that that job requires. You can also hire based upon company needs, organization needs. So you have job fit or you have organization fit. Taylor was talking about organization fit. Have a fair level of pay. He felt that that was very important, but it's also important for you to know that Taylor did not believe that workers should have an increase over, I think, as I remember, he said 60%, because he said if it got higher than that, then the worker would not want to do work. Here he talked about time and motion studies, time it takes to perform a task, and versus the time needed to perform the task. So the two had to be in sync. And then he developed what was known as, here, as you can see on the slide, the principle of motion economy. So what he was saying here is that every job can be broken down into its essential steps, if you will, and then to follow those and essential steps, essential motions, whatever, and not to do anything more than what is needed. The slide also mentions that time and motion studies were later developed by Frank and Lillian Gilbreth, and they had a very successful career. As a matter of fact, there was a popular book that the two wrote, Cheaper by the Dozen. That's because they had 12 children. And Frank and Lillian were really co-equals in this time and motion study business. And differently from the time that they did this back in the early 1900s. When Frank died, Lillian kept on doing what he was doing, and people continued to consult with her. So I wanted to say that, you know, while we hear today, I'm talking about what we hear today, and they have heard for a number of years, there are not enough women in management. Women aren't paid as well as men are paid, etc. And those things are true, and I'm not glossing over those. What I want to say to you is that Lillian Gilbreth was sought after by people in the late teens of the 1900 teens and the early 1920s. There was another woman who was a well-respected management guru that I think we talk about a little bit here, Mary Parker Follett. And some of her ideas are now just coming back into vogue, but she was well-respected and well-renowned. And it seems to me that why do we have to continue to reinvent this wheel? And we had people who were, two women who were, I'm going to use the word lionized in what they did, and rightfully so. And yet we're still on this thing. We don't have enough women in management positions, especially upper management, and women aren't paid to the same scale rate that men are paid. Last I knew was about 81 or 2 cents on the dollar. In other words, a man made $1, women made 81 or 82 cents. That's better than what it used to be, but it's not where it ought to be. This particular slide talks about stress on the job, and really gets us a little bit away from what we're talking about here. But I put these things up because these are things that you, as an individual, should watch in yourselves, and to make sure that you notice those things and that you act upon those things and get yourself back into the right balance. Because if you're stressed, you're not going to be able to do what it is that you want to do, either for your employer or for yourself. Now, Fred Taylor still abounds. Fred Taylor is most of his, or many of his rules, many of his concepts and theories, if you want to say, are still used by United Parcel today. United Parcel has a lot of rules and regulations. Notice how you get out of the truck, how fast to walk, what finger you carry your rings on, etc. And many people rebel at that, but UPS has been very successful in using those. Now, the next thing we get to is, by the way, I want to digress here a second and give you some idea of what Taylor did. He had a fellow by the name of Schmidt that he worked with at Bethlehem Steelworks, and he was his guinea pig, if you will. And he told Schmidt, "You're gonna haul this pig iron, these pigs, 100 pounds of iron ore. You're gonna haul these when I tell you to haul them. You're going to use the tools I tell you to use, and you're going to rest when I tell you to rest." Well, Schmidt's production before Taylor got a hold of him was 12.5 pigs a day. He increased that almost fourfold after following Taylor's rules and procedures to 47.5 tons a day. Very, very large increase, for which Schmidt's pay was increased to $1.85 a day. Now, if you think about what his production level was, he increased his production. By the way, this figure came from an old text that I have, by 280%. So who made out the most on this? Certainly the company did. So we have to think about how Taylor's motivation worked and what it did and what it didn't do. But the next motivation theory we come to, it was a theory that it's known today as the Hawthorne effect. You can use Google or some other search engine to get a little bit more information than what we're going to cover tonight. It was research conducted by Elton Mayo, who was a Harvard professor, and his team. And the reason it's called the Hawthorne effect is because these experiments pardon me, were carried out at the Western Electric plant in Hawthorne, Illinois. A couple of things happened here. One is that they found out that people act differently when they're being watched, or as the slide says, being studied. And you know, I don't think that's something that we today would take and say, well, gee whiz, that's not anything new. We know that. But in the 1920s, late 1920s, early 1930s, people didn't realize that. Workers really had not been studied a whole lot to see how they worked and what they did and so on and so forth. Now, there were a couple other things with the Hawthorne fact that I want to bring to your notice. That they also had another experiment that they went on, that people were actually work efficiency, studying efficiency under different levels of light. And what they did was they took the light down to where it would be akin to moonlight on a bright night. And they found out that the production did not change at all, that in fact it stayed relatively the same or perhaps even increased regardless. Why? It wasn't because of the light. It wasn't because of the tools they used or the room that they worked in. What they found out was it was the relationships that people had with their fellow workers. So there was a human factor at play here. And it was very interesting to what they found. So we know here now what the Hawthorne effect is. There's one other thing about one other experiment, the Hawthorne, I want to mention to you, and that was the researchers decided to have people work 5 days a week. Now, in those days, the late 20s and early 30s, the 6-day work week was the norm. And so the researchers immediately decided that the work would decrease, the amount of work would decrease, productivity would decrease by 16%. You take 6 into 100, you get 16%. So you're taking, you're taking a sixth out of the work week. So 1/6 is 16%. Actually 16 and 2/3%, but we'll round it and say 16%. And what they found was that production actually went up. Why? Again, because of the human thing. People were asked about what they wanted to do, how they wanted to do it, conditions they wanted to work in, et cetera, et cetera. There were a couple other ones that they used. They had a bank wiring thing where men worked together and they were supposed to make so many dials for phones on a particular day. And I don't remember what the exact norm was, but if somebody worked too fast, a person was called company man and so on and so forth. And they would, get into little fights and go up and do binging on people's arms and things like that to get them to slow down, not to do so much. People were called company man. They were called Farlap, who was a famous racehorse in those days. And what again they found that there was this norm that was set up amongst the workers about what was going to be done, and it was not correct to not stick with the norm. So
your entry is not valid.
That's what they found. Now we're going to move to perhaps the most famous of the motivational theories. I'm not going to say it's the best. I won't say any one is the best. There's one that I particularly like, and I'll mention it when we get to it. And that is Maslow's theory, a hierarchy of needs. And so what Maslow is simply saying, by the way, Maslow starts on page 273 in your text, and then the slide we're going to show next, which is the pyramid, is on page 274, figure 10.1. Maslow says that everybody has a hierarchy of needs, and the most basic is for physiological needs for food and water and other types of sustenance. And then once that need is satisfied, the individual then moves along to, and we'll get the pyramid here for you, then moves along to social needs, and then, to safety needs. And that's, a house over your house and a roof over your head and things of that nature. Then it moves from safety needs to social needs. That's interacting with your fellow humans. Then to esteem needs, and then finally to self-actualization. Now, the two, esteem needs and self-actualization, are actually the higher level of the 5 needs, and the other 3 are what are known as the lower level. There's been a lot of complaint about Maslow's theory because people say that people can move from one need to another without the lower need being satisfied. And so that people could be at 2 levels of need at the same time. Not really here talking about the lower level, not the esteem and self-actualization. Maslow even went so far as to say that most people will probably not reach self-actualization because it's something that you're always aspiring to achieve. And once you've achieved one thing, there's something else you want to achieve, and so on and so forth, and it continues. Now, there are other theories of motivation that we are not going to discuss here tonight, but we are going to discuss one that I like very well, and I said I would get to, and that's Hertzberg's, Fred Hertzberg's motivating factors and hygiene factors. So Hertzberg said, notice here, what factors controlled by managers are most effective in increasing worker motivation? And then conversely, how do you rank those factors? Do they motivate me? How do you relate these to motivation? And so if you look at Hertzberg's motivating factors, the series of them can be found at the bottom of page 274 and the top of page 275. He mentions 14 of them. And you'll notice that pay, which many of us rank high, is down to number 8. Whereas a sense of achievement, and that would most likely be an intrinsic reward, is highest. There are other things that he mentions in there. So then those are what Hertzberg calls motivators. And he breaks this down into the content of the job and then into the context of the job. So he felt that the motivators were things within the content of the job that help motivate people. And conversely, he felt that the hygiene factors were in the context of the job. And we can look at the hygiene factors, and they're down here in figure 10.2 at the bottom of page 275. Those are things that are associated with job dissatisfaction. And if they are fixed, in other words, they're addressed, they won't necessarily increase motivation. They will just decrease job satisfaction. But notice he talks about working conditions and supervision, interpersonal relations, et cetera, et cetera. And it's very important to say here, this last thing, that they do not necessarily motivate employees if they're addressed, fixed, et cetera. Now, there's a little problem with Hertzberg's theory. There are a lot of people who like it. I told you I did. I think that we can see these things at work. The problem with his theory is that Hertzberg worked with 200 people. They were either accountants or they were engineers. Those people are very lockstep in what they do. And I don't mean that to be bad. That's just the nature of their professions. And so he didn't use a random sample of individuals. And because of that, his research has not been able to be replicated because, again, he didn't use a random sample. But that does not mean to say that his theory does not have some cachet about motivation in the workplace. You can look at figure 10.3 at the top of page 276, and it will show you in comparison style, side by side, how Hertzberg's factors, motivators, or hygiene factors stack up with Maslow. Now we're going to move to another theory. Well, before we get here, we're going to address something else. This is reignite employees' drive. Don't work all the time, redecorate your space, don't complain, etc. So now we want to talk about Douglas McGregor's theory X and theory Y. And this has a lot, I think, of importance because I think we all can identify some managers or supervisors that fall into these things. X and Y, as it sort of really plays out, is that they're poles apart. And McGregor says that Theory X managers really say that workers don't like to work. They have to be kind of coerced into work. Notice they use the words threatened and are punished. That the only reason they're there is for pay and other some type of other reward. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. Those are managers now. I'm not talking about employees. McGregor says, on the other hand, there are managers that espouse a theory Y, that people actually like work. It's as natural as anything else that they do. They will commit to goals that they have a vested interest in. I'm saying a little bit different that's on the slide. They'll also commit to goals where they think there's a reward with. Now, if they don't think the reward is really good, they may not do as much as they should. People do like to use their creative thinking to solve problems. And that last there is people are motivated by a variety of rewards. So these two theories are really much different than what we would expect other people, the theory X and the theory Y, much different than what we expect. William Ucci came up with a third type thing, which is sort of, in my estimation, a playoff of theory X and theory Y, and that's theory Z. What he says is that type A focuses on the individual. He brings up a couple other ones, type A. And that he also talks about the type J person, which is Japanese management. And you can see this graphically displayed on page 279, your text, figure 10.4. We'll get to this in just a second. And so he has come up with, Ucci has come up with a difference between, let me not say difference, an amalgamation between the type A, which is American, focused on the individual, the type J, Japanese, which is focused on team or collective, and what Ucci says is a modified American. And we'll just give you some kind of idea. I'll let you look at these. I'm not going to try to compare these two. Well, one of the reasons I don't is because I'm really not sure in my own mind how well Ucci's theory has caught on. And the same is true with McGregor. I first started teaching this class many years, well, 15 or so years ago, maybe a little bit more than that now. And I had an individual tell me, boy, my bosses are stuck in theory X, even though we try to get people away from that. So there's some comparisons here. I think you can look at it. If A is employees dislike work and try to, that's the theory X, and then we come to theory Y, and then we come to theory Z. Employee involvement is key to increased productivity. And I think we can all resonate with that. I think that resonates with each of us, I guess I should say, better way of saying that. And when employees are involved in their work and some planning and things of that nature, they tend to be more committed to it. And a more committed employee is going to be a better employee and going to give you better production. I'm not going to go through the rest of these. I do ask that you kind of look at them for yourself so that you have some kind of an idea of where you want to go with that. Goal setting theory. This is interesting because what it talks about here, and if you look at the beginning, you're setting goals for your employees which are, let's use the word, ambitious. I prefer a different word which is not coming to me right now, But the next part is necessary. Not only is it ambitious, but it's attainable. Now, why is that important? It's important because the employee needs to see that here is a goal that we want to achieve, and yes, it's ambitious. And yes, it's attainable. Now, ambitious many times talks about being hard or difficult. And so here the employee says, oh, well, this is a difficult, my word now, difficult goal, but I can get there. I can achieve it. Now, conversely, if we set a goal that the employee realizes that he or she cannot achieve no matter how hard he or she works, they're not going to try. And the same thing is true with a relatively easy goal. The employee can say, why do I want to spend my effort on something that's so simple? So there's some other things that go in here. This is the contract, if you will. Some places, if you're using management by objectives, which is goal setting theory, or type of goal setting theory, there is a contract and there's a signature there. This can be done verbally, but notice it's done here. There's feedback that's given. So the employee knows how well he or she is doing at a particular time. And the organization is going to give the employee the needed resources to do the job. Don't have the needed resources, they're not going to be able to do the job, and they're not going to want to do the job because I don't have what I need. So those things are important, and we need to pay attention to that. This is the management by objective I talked about. Notice that what it says there is cycle of discussion and review and feedback, etc. We used a type of this when I was in the Army. The last set of performance evaluations we used a type of management by objective. And we were required, we as supervisors, I'm using that term, were required to meet with our subordinates, the people that we rated their performance on a quarterly basis and review how well they've met the goals and et cetera. And we both signed that. Now that was done in pencil because we might want to change some things, et cetera, et cetera. It wasn't an official, it was an official document, but it wasn't one we were going to submit with signatures, et cetera. We might submit that as supporting evidence, but we weren't going to, it wasn't the quote unquote official form we were using. There has to be a give and take here. Has to be an agreement. A lot of people feel that part of the issue here is that there will be more attention paid to goals set at the office or division level as opposed to the overarching goals set by the organization. So more attention paid to what I'm doing as opposed to how what I'm doing fits into the organization's mission, goals, and objectives. And this just gives you a little graphic here, if you will, of how to set up MBO. I'm not going to go through this too much because it's pretty easy to see and understand. These are companies that use, excuse me, I want to skip back for who uses MBO: Toyota, Emerson Electric, Department of Defense, and there are others. These are the ones that are highlighted by that. And here we are now. Here we are at I was going to say something different, but here we are at another motivation theory, and that's expectancy theory. And the employee is going to ask some questions down there. Can I do what I'm being asked to do? What's in it for me? Is what I'm being offered worth my effort? And last, notice that expectations can vary from person to person. Now, if you look at the page, top of page 281 in your text, we say, can accomplish the task. If person says no, he or she's not motivated. And then we come over here, is the reward worth it? And if it's not, again, not motivated. And if the two answers are yes, then that person is motivated. Now, Nadler and Lawler had a little modification on expectancy theory, and they came up with these 5 steps. First is find out what the employee is looking for in a way of reward. Isn't that unique? Look at the performance standard. Make sure the standards are attainable. Well, we've talked about that before. Tie the reward to the performance. Now, what they mean here is that if a person completes a certain percentage of it, they wouldn't get the entire reward. And then make sure that the employee feels that the reward is adequate. Now, the next theory we come to, again, motivation, excuse me, I thought I had it, but I didn't, is reinforcement theory. Now, reinforcement theory can be seen here at the bottom of page 281. We have positive and negative. See what positive, rewards, increases, promotions, etc. Negative, on the other hand, happens when people work to escape punishment. Occurs when people work to escape punishment. And we have things that are like reprimands and deduction in pay and obviously layoffs and firing. Now, normally speaking, you would not use a layoff if you're trying to use negative reinforcement. Layoffs tend to be across the board and not at the individual level. What would happen at the individual level is a person's job would be abolished. So we wouldn't talk about laying off the person. We would say, we no longer need this job. We've done a desk audit, whatever type of research we're doing, and found that we don't need this job, and therefore we're going to eliminate it. Job, not person, job. Now, equity theory is, again, something that's interesting because this is where a person compares his or her outputs to someone else, and that someone else is known as a comparison other. So notice that equity between inputs and outputs compared to other people working in similar jobs. And a person is going to do several things, but what happens here is if they believe they're not being treated equitably, they will have a number of choices, and none of them are good for the company. Notice they're going to reduce their output. They may become absent, late, whatever. They may decide to look for a new job. On the plus side, they could decide to look for a different comparison other. But that doesn't necessarily follow that that would be a good option. So that's something that you really have to be concerned with when people are thinking about that. All right, that's our equity theory. Now, we need to do things to put these motivational theories that we've learned into action. And one of the first we can do is a thing called job enrichment. which follows along some of Hertzberg's theory, because job enrichment is based upon responsibility. It's based on achievement. It's based on recognition, as the slide says. Very important type things. Really what's happening here is you're giving you, Mr. or Miss Supervisor, manager, are giving the employee the job with all the needed resources, and then you're getting out of the way. Doesn't mean to say you won't be around to provide assistance or give feedback or something else, but you're getting out of the way. So I don't really want to talk about this motivation on a budget, but I want to go to, and I'm really not sure why that slide's in there. But this is the job enrichment, and it's motivation again through job enrichment, which you can see at the top of page 283, and has 5 different characteristics: skill variety, task identity, task significance, autonomy, and feedback. Now, every one of these is important, and feedback is very important because you're telling the person, this is what you're doing, this is how you're doing it, and this is where you're going. Now, there are different types of job enrichment. The one I spoke of is kind of the holistic thing, giving the whole enchilada. We have 2 here that it shows as job enlargement and job rotation. Here, job enlargement is actually taking what were formerly 2 different tasks that could be complementary, didn't have to be, and telescoping them into one. So the employee has more responsibility now. And job rotation is exactly what it says. You're moving an employee from one job to another. Most of the time, that is lateral. There's no promotion involved with that. It does a couple of things. Number one, it makes the employee multi-skilled. 2, it gives the company another employee that they can plug in some other place as needed. So job enlargement, job rotation. Now, we must also say that these are not for everybody. Not every job should be enriched. We just have to think, we just have to remember that. Here's a little data here. Employees, 60% of employees think they can be efficient outside the office. 2/3 of employees said they would take a lower paying job if there was more flexibility, allowing them to do certain things. And 59% say the company doesn't have a formal out of work policy. Here is a list of rewards and a way to motivate using communication. Look at the first thing. It's a culture within the organization that values listening. Now, there's another step there. You value listening and then taking actions upon what you've heard. People have to be trained to listen. Very, very important thing to do. Remove any barriers to open communication, and then find out what's important to employees. One of the things that you have to remember about listening is to stop talking. You cannot talk and listen. I cannot talk and listen. That's the most important thing. And then there's some other tips for that. We don't get into that in this course, but I have some of those tips, and I'll pass those on to you. I didn't bring them in tonight. I apologize. I had something else to do today. That's probably a lame excuse. I'll try to bring those tips in, and I'll pass them along to you. A very, very good thing to do. By the way, I learned these tips many years ago, one of the first courses I taught, and they're very effective. And I can't say that I practice them, but they are very effective. Notice that about Facebook, I'm not going to go into this. I try to get away from that. That's some other things that we don't need to talk about. Make sure that you do these things when you're schedule correspondence, pick one task, don't answer the phone, maintain human contact. This is when you're talking to people. Don't look at your computer or phone when someone is at your desk. Very, very important. These are things that help motivate. We can recognize people by other things: flexible scheduling, paid child or elder care, stock options or profit sharing, things of that nature. Work well with others. Make sure you understand your task. Clarify roles and responsibilities. Set rules. And talk to each other continually. Positive remedies for employee morale. Look at the first one's open communication, 48%. Those other ones. Notice here what's bad for you. Lack of open communication, 33%. Excessive workloads, micromanagement, etc. We have to be careful about motivating employees across international boundaries. High context cultures, which we are not, require relationship building and trust before you get performance. We, United States, are just the reverse. Really, you need to understand the culture, and it's more than just knowing other languages. And it's very important that you know that. Different people have to be motivated differently. We have baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, or millennials. We have to pay attention to what they are. Generation Z grew up after the disaster of September 11th, 2001, and the Great Recession that we had, and we have to be careful about how we treat those people as well. Generation X wants security in the workforce. Millennials are tech savvy. We know that. And they want a strong sense of commitment. Baby boomers want meetings and conference calls. Gen X email. Gen Y technology to communicate. And this is just a listing of the best companies to work for. Well, that brings us at 5:20 to the end of Chapter 10. We're going to take a 3-minute break to 5:23, and we will come back and talk about Chapter 11, Human Resource Management, Finding and Keeping the Best Employees. Please come back 5:23. All right. 523, we're back. Chapter 11, Human Resource Management, Finding and Keeping the Best Employees. Well, let's look at our learning objectives. Explain the importance of human resource management. Describe current issues in managing human resources. Obviously, we won't talk about all of them. Illustrate the effects of legislation on human resource management. Well, there's another one here. I can't, my slide is not cooperating. Summarize the 5 steps of human resource planning and describe the methods that companies use to recruit new employees. Outline the 6 steps of selecting employees. Illustrate employee training and development methods. Trace the 6 steps in appraising employee performance. That's very important. Summarize the objectives of employee compensation programs and evaluate pay systems. We'll do that a little bit, as well as fringe benefits. And finally, there's a lot of outcomes here or objectives we want to get to today. Demonstrate how managers use scheduling plans to adapt to workers' needs. And finally, describe how employees can move through a company promotion, reassignment, termination, and retirement. Human resource management, very important. The role of human resource management, especially in large companies, has increased today, that we're paying more attention to that. And human resource management is also, it is really projecting at the beginning the needs the company has, not only for today, but in the future. And then recruiting, selecting those folks. Once they're on board, developing and motivating and evaluating their performance. And I'll come back to that in a second. And then they have plans for policies for compensation and scheduling, helping employees meet those organizational goals. Human resource management does recruit, and it does a major part of the selection process. Usually the final selection of an employee is up to the hiring manager, or could be hiring managers or a team. Human resource management plays a role in that. Human resource management also plays a role in developing and motivating employees, but they do that in a policy manner. They don't do that as a hands-on person. The hands-on people are the supervisors and managers that do those things. Same is true with evaluation. Human resource management helps the manager with the evaluation process, but they don't do the evaluation itself. They should be training the managers on how to evaluate, to look out for roadblocks and obstacles and poor evaluations, etc. But they don't do the evaluation themselves. They do the compensation scheduling. They do that themselves. They write the policies. Of course, that's approved by the CEO or someone else, their chief operating officer, perhaps. They do that. They don't actually schedule employees. They set parameters for scheduling. They might work out things for flex time and things of that nature, maybe telecommuting. But they don't actually set the exact schedule. That's up to the manager or the supervisor to do that. So it's important for human resource managers and for the human resource department and those folks that work in there and that have these job responsibilities to adequately train supervisors and managers so that they're actually doing the things they're supposed to be doing in concert with human resource management policies. Human resource management is very important. Notice this first bullet here, and I'm going to say it a little bit differently than what it says here. Employees are an organization's most expensive resource, but at the same time, they're the organization's most valuable resource. So we need to treat employees like they want to be treated, not like, hey, you. And then, of course, we have changes in laws that human resource management folks have to keep abreast of. So we're doing the things that we need to do for employees correctly. I'm not going to go over this slide. You can see this. This is figure 11.1, your text on page 301. And it shows how human resource management spins off, if you will, organization goals and all the things that are part of human resource management. This is a slide that I'm really not going to pay a lot of attention to. You can look at this. Things that you don't want anybody to say. We're short-staffed and under pressure too. You don't say that. Human resource management and the human resource people really are employee advocates, if you will, and they have to be accessible, and they have to be there. Things that have to be there for the employee to help the employee through the issues that he or she is facing. I'm not saying that they're supposed to take up for an employee that is a bad performer. That's not my point, but they're an employee's advocate, and they have to act in that manner. This particular slide just talks about, well, it's not up there as well as I'd like for it, but the employee is the ultimate resource. And here we're talking about people in the service and high-tech industries. People today have to have good technical skills. There are very, very, very few jobs today that an employee does not have to have some technical ability to be able to navigate the internet, etc. We talked in the last week about computer-aided design and computer-aided manufacturing. So employees are expected to use computers. And we expect employees to be more skilled today than they were in the past. Now, I'm only talking about technical skills. I haven't even mentioned creative thinking and writing skills and things of that nature, which we expect as well. Now, there is a challenge in finding workers, skilled workers. And one of the things that's happening today, and is a cyclical type thing, is the fact that our economy has gotten better. Now, some of you would argue, and I don't dismiss this, that the economy has gotten better unevenly. That's probably true. I saw something on the internet the other day that talked about how the economy has done well in areas where big cities are, not necessarily the big cities themselves, although they were part of that, but certainly on the periphery of the big cities. But there are many places in this country in rural areas, and I'm not talking here about farming, I'm talking about rural areas where there is not a good employer. What I mean by good employer who's somebody who's going to be able to bring a number of people into work. And cities and towns, and mostly small, that don't have good opportunities for employment are ripe for all sorts of things that we don't like to see happen. Illegal activities, etc. I'm not going to go into them, and I'm not thinking about any particular community, but we have those, and we continually hear things about uneven distribution of wealth and pay gap, etc. And those things are true. And they may be truer in perception than they are in reality, but we have to remember perception is reality. Now, we don't have a declining economy with fewer full-time jobs. We added last year, we being the economy in the United States, business in the United States, added over 2 million jobs to the economy. That is not a stagnant economy. You have to remember when this text was put together, we were still crawling out of the recession. So it probably is something that should have been changed and was not. We always find those things. Now, we do have increasing benefit demands and benefit costs, but that does not go to employment. That goes to the government. So we have to think about that. Employers need to think about what it is that's going to attract employees, and we're going to get to that in a few minutes. A decreased sense of employee loyalty, well, that may be true. I don't know that there's any empirical data that says that. I do think that people today are more interested in their leisure time than they may have been in the past. And because of that, we may see that creep over into loyalty. These are the things that impact finding qualified workers. Now, what I mean by impact is that we can't discriminate. And so it used to be that you could discriminate and find who you wanted. You can still discriminate, but you discriminate based upon qualifications, not any of these things listed here. Can't do that. Should never have been able to do that. That, by the way, that came out of the Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And then carrying along with that, we have a strengthened Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They can come in and check what people are doing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What I want to tell you is that if employers follow the law, there are not going to be any problems with this. It's only when employers decide they want to do things differently, pardon me, that problems crop up. Controversies with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, affirmative action. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is not the generator of affirmative action. Affirmative action was put into the books, if you will, by executive order by President Lyndon Johnson in 1965. He did that actually to level the playing field for federal government employment and for contractors who were working with the federal government. EEOC does have the right to enforce those things, but enforcement at the private sector is kind of doesn't happen too often. It does happen in some cases. For instance, there was a company in, I think it was Allen Bradley in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, very well-known company, very good reputation. They only hired based upon internal referrals. And so their employee base was roughly 100% white. What's wrong with that? Well, they're in Milwaukee, and their employment base did not match the surrounding community. I don't know what the surrounding community demographics of Milwaukee are, but it's not 100% white. And of course, this has brought in a thing called reverse discrimination. And what I say to you is, by the way, I've never been harmed one way or another by affirmative action. But what I say to you is this, that people who say these things simply aren't looking at the way the executive order was written. I do think that this Supreme Court will eventually strike down affirmative action. It's taken several cases recently, and I think that's going to happen. But I don't necessarily agree with what I think the court's going to do. We need to go back one. No, all right. Civil Rights Act of 1991, which amended the Civil Rights Act of 1964, gave victims of discrimination the right to jury trial and possible damages. And then we have the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, OFCCP. This ensures that individuals and corporations, companies doing business with the federal government, are complying with existing laws. We know that we have laws that cover folks with disabilities. I didn't get there. That was signed into the law in 1990. And what it simply says is that employers are required to make reasonable accommodations. This only applies to companies with 25 or more employees. The operative word is reasonable. If it is not reasonable, the company does not have to do that. There was a case of an individual who was disabled. It was going to be having something to do with an assembly line. And he said, well, the only way he could do that, was that if the assembly line, instead of running clockwise, ran counterclockwise. And the company said, well, we're not going to do that because that's not reasonable. He went to court, and the court decided that it wasn't reasonable, and the company wasn't going to have to do it. So the operative word is reasonable. Age discrimination, that protects people who are age 40 and over from arbitrary decisions. And again, it covers a laundry list of promotions, firings, etc. Employers have to know the law, and that's what they have human resource department for. Legislation affects everything a company does, and we know that changes in legislation occur on a frequent basis, so it has to be kept up with. Now, this is the human resource planning process. What you're going to do at the beginning is have an inventory of who currently works for you. Preparing job analyses. This says analysis. I'm just using plural because you're going to have more than one employee. Forecasting, assuring that there are going to be people available to work for you when you need them in the future, and having a plan if the local area in which you operate is not going to have that type of employee. Go someplace else. Now, I'm not talking about moving the company, but where are you going to go to recruit those people? This is in connection with the future labor supply, and then having a plan to do everything that you want to do. The job analysis is simply a study of what the employee does. Now, that can be done by a number of ways. It can be done by surveys. It can be done by actually watching the employee. That's dangerous. You could do it by videotape. You could have some current and former employees say, this is a list of our duties, et cetera, and then that's bounced against what the current supervisor or manager does. From the job analysis, you have two other documents: the job description, job specification. The description says the job objectives, what the type of work is, responsibilities, working conditions, reporting relationships, etc. Whereas job specifications talk about the minimum qualifications an individual needs to hold, that covers education, experience, etc., etc. The operative word there is minimum. So if it requires, I'm going to use this from education, if it requires a bachelor's degree, you don't want to say it requires a master's degree, because you get a guy or gal there with a master's degree and they're going to say, you don't need me, and they're not going to stay very long. And then what's the cost of having to go out and do the recruitment selection all over again? Well, to boil this down to simple terms, this is what we do to find the people we need and get them to apply for open positions. We use internal or external recruiting methods. And then many companies, not just small ones, use CareerBuilder and Monster.com to find employees. Small businesses have to find the right people. Now, the problem is small businesses just don't have the resources. So they need to do other things, getting other people to help them, et cetera, et cetera. Auditioning an employee is also an interesting term. These are just sources of where we find people who we want to try to recruit. This is shown to you in figure 11.4 at the bottom of page 308. I'm not going to go through that that whole laundry list. Selection. Now we've recruited a number of people and they've applied, so we have either their job application or resume or both. And so we're going to use that, and we're going to use that as a first cut in selection. People who meet the requirements, the minimum requirements, we're going to move them along. People who don't meet their minimum requirements, we're going to send them a letter, thank you for applying, et cetera, et cetera. So then there's other processes that we go into the selection process, and we'll follow that. So we have to have accurate application forms. Initial interview, that's a screening interview. In other words, the person go to the next step. Employment tests if they're required. Background investigations, most places do require that. Physical examination, a lot of people, a lot of organizations require physical examination. That has to be completed. And then establishing trial or probationary work periods. This is a slippery slope. This comes back to the old thing of employment at will, where the employee or the employer can terminate the relationship at any time. If you're going to use a probationary period, it has to be clearly articulated in the employment offer and the reasons that would be a problem. It's probably best not to have a probationary period at all. I'm not going to go into that a whole lot because it would take a lot of time to go through that, but you're really in a slippery slope when you talk about it. This is just a gee whiz slide. Areas where job applicants made mistakes. Resumes are you have to be very careful about resumes because there are a lot of mistakes made on the resume. Some intentional, a lot unintentional. You have to be careful about using Facebook. And if there's a policy about not using Facebook in the company, once the person's hired, they need to know that. Conversely, if you're going to check a person's Facebook or Twitter or something else, before they're hired, they need to know that. You need to tell them, we're going to do this background check, and that includes what you post on social media. Otherwise, you're asking for trouble if you don't do that. Contingent workers. These are folks who don't work for you. It says they're part-time, but for the most part, we think of contingent workers as being temps, seasonal workers, independent contractors, as it mentions up there. By the way, if you have an intern, you're supervising an intern, find out what you're allowed to do, what the intern's allowed to do, and don't deviate. I don't have all that information in front of me, but interns are frequently not used for what they're supposed to be used for. Make sure that you know what you're doing and don't violate the law. Companies hire contingent workers for a number of reasons. Sometimes your regular staff is out, but sometimes you have a jump in production. Sometimes you're not sure what's going to happen because our economy is in flux. And of course, it doesn't cost you much because you don't have to pay benefits. And it's also an opportunity to perhaps screen people for potential employment down the road. There are employment agencies, staffing agencies that you can use, and that's probably a good thing to do because they will let you know when a potential employee is good, bad, or indifferent. Here's some information about interns. Interns can end up in unpaid position for as long as 6 months, no chance of advancement. Some interns are given a lot of responsibility. Notice what a Toronto company did. Now, I don't know what they can do in Canada, but you couldn't do that in the United States. Be careful about this. That's not something that you want to get involved with if you don't know what the legalities are. This is something we really have to do. We train employees to perform their current jobs and perhaps a future job if equipment changes, etc. We develop employees for the long term. And normally speaking, we develop employees who are at management level or at some particular job that requires development. Ordinarily, we don't develop rank and file people unless they're showing potential, and then we'll do that. We develop by assessing what the organization needs versus the skills that the employee has. We have development. I'm going to stay away from that word training because we're developing employees and we're not training them. We have development scenarios that meet the needs of the individual and are complementary with the needs of the organization. And then we come back and evaluate what we did and its effectiveness. These are the different types of development and training we do: orientation, OJT, on the job training, online training, vestibule training, job simulation, and of course apprenticeships as well. This is management development. That's what I kind of talked about a little bit before, but we want to enlarge this, talk about on-the-job coaching, understudy positions. That a lot of times is talking about mentoring. You have somebody who's a mentor, kind of takes you around and shows you what to do. Job rotation, which we talked about in Chapter 10, great way to develop employees. And then, of course, courses outside. This slide just talks about why employees leave the organization. No specific reason happens a lot, but unhappy with management. And that's over a third of people leave because of that. We need to think about that and get people in the right work. We appraise performance for a number of reasons. We now want to know how people are doing, if they're doing their job, and we appraise performance against published standards. That would be from the job analysis, job description, job specification. 360-degree is popular today. That is a combination of the supervisor, the employee, him or herself, other people that he or she interacts with, customers, suppliers, etc. The idea is it's a holistic type of evaluation that gives a good view of what an employee does. Well, we can't evaluate without having established standards. The employee has to know what the standards are. We evaluate against the standards. We don't evaluate the employee because we like him or her. Evaluate against standards. We give the employee feedback. We take corrective action or help the employee take corrective action. And then we use the results of the performance appraisal to make decisions such as raises, promotions, additional training, etc. This is the do's and don'ts of employee performance appraisals. Make sure that you allow a sufficient time to do the evaluation. It has to be private, and then you always give the employee the opportunity to give a rebuttal, if you will. Start off by stressing the positive, and then get to whatever the negative is, and you talk about performance against published standards, not about the employee. And then over here, you don't attack the employee, don't make them feel uncomfortable, and don't wait till the appraisal to address problems. If there are problems, you need to address those ahead of time. The appraisal is sort of a culmination, all right? So don't do it otherwise. And then what you want to do, you want to identify any training needs that person needs, do recognition, and you may evaluate the firm's hiring process, you may not. And then, of course, you can use it as a termination tool. Here are mistakes we made. One is known as the contrast effect. That's comparing one employee with another. Although there is a form of evaluation known as paired comparison, but you're not evaluating the employee against another employee. You're evaluating his performance against hers or hers against his. A halo horn effect, allowing performances in specific areas to unfairly influence everything that you have, positive or negative. And then similar to me, you're being kind in the evaluation because the person's similar to what you do. Compensation programs, you have to have a program that attracts employees. Now you can do one of three things. You can lag the market, you can meet the market, you can be ahead of the market. And so this is what you want to do. You want to have the type of pay and type of pay systems and benefits that attract the type of employees that you're looking for. Several different kinds of pay systems. You can have a commission system. Everybody knows what that is. You get paid based upon what you sell. Bonus plans, profit sharing plans, gain sharing plans, and stock option plans. You can have compensation teams where teams are paid based upon their production. Two most common, skill-based pay and gain sharing pay. As your skills go up, pay increases, and the gain sharing, this is normally across the board, and pay goes up as performance increases. Nucor Steel and Eastman Kodak are two companies that do that. Fringe benefits, and we know what they are: health care, dental care, maybe child care, elder care, etc. Look at this graphic here. 1929, fringe benefits accounted for 2% of payroll costs. Today, they're 30%. We know that healthcare is something that's expensive, and we need to pay attention to that. This gives us a slide. 74% of full-time workers have employer-provided retirement plans of some kind. 39% of part-timers have that. 71% of workers have healthcare. Healthcare is going to change again. I just don't know how or why. These are different types of fringe benefits. I'm not going to go through those. This is something that DreamWorks does. Cafeteria style benefits are very popular. Employee can choose up to the benefits they want up to a certain dollar amount. We do have issues with benefits in different countries, so employers need to understand that and make sure how they're handled. We've talked about flex time before. If people can do that, they have to be at work at the core operating hours. The core hours are 10 to 2. An employee has to be there from 10 to 2, and then he or she can adjust their schedule based upon what's convenient for them. But they have to be at their desk or their place from 10 to 2. Now, this gives you just an idea here. They show core time as 9:30 to 11, and then they show core time as 2 to 3. So that's when people have to be there. Compressed work weeks. The most popular ones are either 10-hour, 12-hour days, 3 12-hour days, and a person would be off for 4 days. There are also 4 10-hour days. We also know about telecommuting. This is home-based work. 13 million Americans work from home. Home-based work, there are some benefits. Individuals in familiar surroundings, and you decrease putting people on the street and things that I'm talking about, traffic, etc. But you can, how do you appraise their job performance? It's difficult to do that. Some people feel isolated, and what I always say is you have to have a person who really is motivated to do that and is self-disciplined to work from home, and knows that when I'm in this place, I'm at work. When I step across the boundary, the threshold here, I'm at home, and I'm not going to share this. Job sharing. There's some benefits to job sharing. Normally, 2 part-time people hold 1 full-time job. There is some thought of being motivation and freshness and things of that nature. Employees are going to be moved along for various reasons. Be promoted, reassigned, may be terminated, they may retire, etc., and people have to plan for that. Terminating employees is never easy, and it has to be done in private. Layoffs are one thing, termination is something entirely different. If an employee is terminated, he or she should be brought to a private room, given the reasons for termination. Employee should be given a chance to state his or her case. Decision, of course, has already been final and firm. Employee should be escorted back to his or her workstation, get the passwords for computer access, etc., and then be escorted off the premises. And that brings us to the end of chapter 11. We'll be back with chapter 12, which deals with employer and labor union issues. I'm short on time. I talk a lot for those 2 chapters, and I apologize. I want to come back at 6:02, and hopefully we can finish up chapter 12 before we leave tonight. I really don't want to hold that over to next week. So come back in just a minute, 6:02. All right, dealing with union and employee management issues. Learning objectives, trace the history of organized labor in the U.S., discuss major legislation affecting labor unions, outline the objectives of labor unions, describe the tactics used by labor and management during conflicts, and discuss the role of unions in the future, and then assess some of today's controversial employment management issues, such as executive compensation, pay equity, child care, elder care, drug testing, and violence in the workplace. These are what unions want to do. And these are what unions did do. They're responsible for minimum wage laws, overtime rules, worker compensation, severance pay, child labor laws. The object of a union is for a singular entity, the union, to represent a large number of people. The thought process is that there is safety in numbers. We have a number of public sector unions, such as teachers and other type government workers. They tend to be a little bit larger today. There's, of course, as you know, if you follow politics at all, been a lot of pushback against these folks. And some people feel that it's very unfair that governments are trying to balance their budgets on the backs of the labor unions. This is what the labor unions want. They want to work with management that is fair and competent, be treated with dignity, and to receive a reasonable share of the profit, wealth. Here's why we have labor unions. The Shirtwaist Company in New York, where 146 women were killed in a fire because they couldn't get out the door. This happened not too long ago in a chicken factory in the southeast part of the United States, where people couldn't get out the door. We have to be careful about those types of things. The Knights of Labor was the first union in the United States, but unions actually go back to the cordwainers, shoemakers, if you will, back in 1792. So they go back that far. Most of those people were skilled workers, and they had guilds and things of that nature, but they weren't unions like we know them today. So we had the Knights of Labor. They accumulated about 700,000 members, and never were able to overcome the fire that happened in Chicago. The labor union was there, and there were some protests, and someone threw a Molotov cocktail that caused the death of 4 Chicago policemen. 4 is what I remember, and there were some riots after that, etc. Some labor union people were brought to justice. They were tried and convicted, although it was never proven that any labor union individual, a higher up or just a rank and file person, actually threw the Molotov cocktail. So there was arrest of judgment there. I'm not here pleading the case of the Knights of Labor, nor am I pleading a case of the justice system that tried them. But there was arrest of judgment, and there was a blame because there was a large Pullman strike going on at the time, railroad cars, and the Knights of Labor were involved with that. The Knights of Labor were succeeded in a way, not really, by the American Federation of Labor, which was formed, you see down here, in 1886, and was led for many years by a gentleman by the name of Samuel Gompers. They were into trade, and they were into skilled people. People that had skills, like people like the cordwainers. Then we have the industrial unions, where people were semi-skilled: steel workers, automobile workers, miners, things of that nature. And they established what was known as the CIO, Congress of Industrial Organizations, that was led by a gentleman by the name of John L. Lewis. And they split from the AFL, American Federation of Labor, in 1935. They reunited in 1955, and what we have today is known as the AFL-CIO. We talked briefly about the public unions. There are 7.2 million of the 14.5 union members work in the government. Almost half. And we taxpayers are paying for that. Like state and local governments, as I mentioned before, are after the public unions, and many of them, especially Wisconsin, have complained that the unions caused them to have a shortfall in their budgets. I don't buy that argument. Yes, it was costly. Yes, maybe some changes need to be made. But the unions, by and large, didn't make decisions that caused the governments to be running in the red. Notice here that labor unions have grown, or what I want to say, not grown, it's sort of regressed, based upon public opinion. And right now, public opinion is not necessarily anti-labor, but we really don't need it. So we had some issues before. We had the Norris-LaGuardia Act, which outlawed yellow dog contracts, where somebody would come and sign, I won't work for a union, or I won't join a union. Now, collective bargaining, on the other hand, is where union and management get together to jointly negotiate the contract. Collective bargaining, we know that among public workers has become an issue. And again, we're paid by taxpayers. And there's some yin and yang about that. I really don't like to talk too much about it, because we're making a scapegoat out of people. And that's kind of the way the text has printed. Now, I know you're going to say you sound like you're pro-union. I'm not pro-union. I've never joined a union in my life. I've never been a union member, and unions have never done anything either for me or against me. I just don't think the text is necessarily being entirely fair when it takes one side of the argument as opposed to the other. Now, collective bargaining, whether it's done for public employee unions or for private employee unions, National Labor Relations Board is part of that. They will come in and oversee any issues. They will take care of certification and or decertification. Certification means that X number of people have voted to have an election as to whether or not they want to be represented by a union. And if the union side gets 50% plus one vote, then the union is certified. Conversely, in decertification process, a number of people said we don't want the union anymore. Same type of election is held, and if the non-union people get 50% plus one, then the union is decertified. That simply means the union no longer represents the workers. National Labor Relations Board will conduct the election either way. Why people join unions: there's poor management. Our management treats employees poorly. Negative organization climate, which kind of follows what I just said. Work conditions are abysmal, and the union has a good reputation. And we know some unions don't have a good reputation. Now, this is what they do. They have a negotiated labor contract, negotiated labor management agreement, the contract. And this sets the terms under which people will work, and this specifies the length of the contract and other things like pay and fringe benefits and things of that nature. The security clause says that those who reap the benefits of a union either have to join a union or pay union dues. Now, there is an issue before the Supreme Court now. Will be, I don't know if the case has been heard yet, where a teacher in California is questioning why he, and I believe it is a he, has to pay union dues. So we'll see. If the court rules that those that reap union benefits don't have to pay union dues, that will be very detrimental to unions. We'll just have to wait and see how that plays out. There are some different union agreements. There's a closed shop agreement that says before to become members of a union, workers have to be members of a union before they can be hired. That's the closed shop agreement that's no longer valid. The union shop agreement says workers don't have to be members to be hired, but must agree to join a union shortly within a specified time after being hired. The agency shop agreement, pardon me, allows employers to hire non-union workers, and of course they don't have to join the union, but they do have to pay union dues. And these are just specifying what happens to be, like I said, the closed shop agreement was outlawed under the Taft-Hartley Act. A number of states have what are known as right-to-work laws. Workers under an open shop agreement to join or not join the union. Taft-Hartley Act allowed that. And then with the open shop agreement, right-to-work states, this is important to know, right-to-work states gives workers the right to join or not join a union if one exists in the workplace. These are the right-to-work states. You can see this graphic in your text. Now this is how we resolve grievances for a labor contract. This is what the contract outlines: the rights of the worker, the union member, and what management can do. So we have grievances, and an employee thinks he is treated unfairly or she's treated unfairly. Management's not adhering to the terms of the contract. He or she grieves to the shop steward. Now, shop steward is a union official. He or she works permanently in the organization and represents the employee's interests. So that's the first thing that happens. Within the bargaining zone, this is things for initial offers and final offers, which the side will have. And then we have the mediator. This is a third-party person who encourages both sides to keep talking, but does not have a power to act. An arbitrator, on the other hand, has the power to make a decision, and his decision or her decision is binding. Both sides have agreed to use the arbitrator. We see this quite frequently in sports, especially in Major League Baseball, where there's salary arbitration that goes forward, and the arbitrator has a choice to either rule in favor of the company, of the baseball club, or in favor of the player. Now this is how the arbitration goes. Well, not the arbitration, but the grieving process. You can see this through shop steward goes to the union business management grievance committee, to the national, and then on the other side, supervisor, labor relations manager, probably human resource manager, maybe plant manager, corporate officer, etc. Unions who feel that the management is unfair will take several actions. They can strike, which means everybody just walks off the job. They'll do a boycott, which they will still work, but boycott the products made by the organization and try to get other people to join a boycott. Go into work slowdown. You hear that often from public sector unions. They will work to the rule. Whatever the rule is, they'll work to. They won't work anything extra, and of course they can picket. Management uses lockouts, so they just shut the gates. Hey, you can't come in. You're not going to work. We're not going to pay you. Period. They can use an injunction, which means they go to court and ask that the workers be required to return to work. Injunctions are not used too often anymore. And you normally see those only in industries that are really necessary for the government. And then the strike breakers bringing in people who are not union employees to work. The unions call those folks scabs. I'm not going to get into that, just going to give you what it is. This is what a lockout is. I just mentioned these, the injunction and the strike breakers. This is a shop till you drop. That's the thing in your text, which you can look at. Number of union workers is falling, although there's an initiative in some of the professions, especially the medical profession, to unionize. And there was an initiative on the West Coast to unionize graduate assistants. Your unions have given back. They gave back in the problems with the auto industry a few years ago, and they've continued to do that. And the union membership, notice more white collar, continue with training, and obviously seek more job security, etc. This is the big issue, compensation of employees. What we've seen today, our CEOs, excuse me, what we've seen today is that more and more CEOs are being compensated by stock options. This means that they're allowed to buy stock at a specified price, but it's not pay. Now, specified price is normally lower than what you or I could buy the stock for, but they're not paying them additional money. So that their overall out-of-pocket compensation pay is not as great. How that's going to continue, I don't know. Question about players. Northwestern University's football players, Monroe gave them the right to unionize. That has been struck down, but it's still percolating around. I don't think we're going to see the end of that. I think we can expect to see that back sometime again in the future. This is an issue for the boards of directors. Most people say that pay should be tied to performance. And we do see corporate boards doing more and more of this. We find that that is something that really is catching on. Equal pay for equal work. Well, I don't think we need to talk about that too much. You have two people doing the same job, same level of experience, et cetera, et cetera. They should be paid the same. Salary and the gender gap. We talk about that, and this is showing it here. A little bit higher what I talked about before, 81 cents on the dollar, but it's something that really we don't need to have. Sexual harassment is unwelcome advances, could be requests for sexual favors, could be other type of verbal or physical conduct which puts a person in an unwelcome, hostile work environment. Two types of sexual harassment: quid pro quo, which is a Latin phrase which means this for that. You do this for me, I'll do that for you. In a hostile work environment, what we call it, this could be pictures, it could be wolf whistles, it could be pornography, it could be any type thing which causes a person to be under some type of stress. These are issues that are coming along. Number of women and our men with children in the workplace. And child care is becoming a big issue. Some companies have actually put child care facilities at the workplace. Some companies are sharing the cost. And there's some benefits for that. This is a big issue. It's not an issue that's going away. It's an issue we need to discuss. These are also things at the other end of the spectrum, elder care. And these are things that are really impact upon people all the time. This is an issue we have to be careful of. Alcohol and drugs in the workplace. Alcohol is a drug. It's not regulated, but it is a drug. Notice the number of people who use alcohol or drugs in the workplace. Look at what it costs the economy, over $400 billion a year. And that's the reason we find people being tested. Violence in the workplace is also a big issue, and something that we have to be careful of. What I can tell you is if you work in a company and you see an employee who needs help, get help. Every organization does not have those things, and it's something that really needs to be taken care of. And then these are what we have to look out for here, and just to be careful of the things that we need to do. And if you notice somebody having these problems, make sure that you get them to competent help. Don't try to do that yourself. I mean, obviously you can try to help them along, but most of us are not medical professionals or psychologists, etc. So make sure that you get them in the proper place and to do the proper things. All right, our discussion question for this evening is, appraising employee performance. What are the 6 parameters of appraising employee performance as listed in the text, and explain why each of them is important. So we want to do performance appraisal. What are the 6 steps in performance appraisal, and why, and what is the importance of each step? Now, please take your time in doing those. You can use the text, but I would like for you to make sure that you enumerate the importance of each one of these things, not just what's in the text. Put some critical thinking skills in this. Why do we do these things? Why is it important to do this? Why is it important to do that? So the 6 steps in the performance appraisal process, and what is the importance of each step. While we are at 6:25, I kind of rushed through the chapter 12. I hope that everyone was able to get what they needed out of that, and so we can move forward. If you didn't get something, please send me an email. I'll try to explain it further to you. Now, next week, I normally cover chapters 13, 14, 15, and 16. I probably will not be able to do that given the time limitations I have, unless I have somebody that joins and I can go longer than the normal 2 hours. So most likely I will cover chapters 13, 14, and 15 next week, and then cover chapters 16, 17, and 18 the following week. It's not something I normally like to do, but given my time constraints, it's something that I have to do. So it's 6:26. I thank you for your attention. I'll have this uploaded for you tomorrow, and will also be available on YouTube. Thank you and good night.